Good morning, everyone. I'm John Paul Brett. My role is heading up the stakeholder engagement team in HMRC Customs and also the Customs guidance team as well. I think I know quite a few of you actually, although it's a really weird world we live in now, isn't it? Most of you I've kind of only seen like as a little icon on a Teams message, so it's lovely to sort of see a lot of you in person, maybe even for the first time. Thanks for the opportunity to come and sort of update you today. My role is just to kind of step back a little bit for this segment. So that's fine that we've overrun the previous discussion, because this is a bit more kind of like strategic focused, sort of looking at some of the longer term plans that we have in the pipeline, some of the things on our forward plan that you may well be aware of already. But certainly things that you might well be interested in, and we'll be looking to sort of prepare for as we sort of go forwards. So this slide just kind of suggests, what are the key things that I'd like to cover today. There's so much going on, right? There's lots of things in the pipeline, but today I'm sort of cherry picking a few. So I wanted to just discuss the package of measures that we announced in December around simplifying customs processes. So I just wanted to unpick that a little bit for you, and then move on to some sort of key changes around the safety and security regime that are happening from October, and then kind of finish off with talking about my sort of other bit of my portfolio as well as stakeholder engagement. I lead on the customs guidance side, and there's some kind of like interesting work going on there around some brand new products which are called customs technical handbooks, which I will talk about as well to finish with. But what I wanted to sort of stress is, with my stakeholder engagement hat on, kind of, again, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today. I work really closely, us in Customs and HMRC, we work really closely with ACITA, and they're a key stakeholder. We often talk about JCCC, probably most of you know that about that already, the Joint Customs Consultative Committee. We work really well and closely with Anna as the trade chair, and also all the other sort of JCCC external members. So we've got some kind of real forums and sort of stakeholder networks that we utilise as much as we can. And I think a key message here is we are looking to do a lot of co-design on these sort of future plans and collaborate really closely with industry. We're looking to put that kind of co-design sort of ethos at the heart of kind of all the new policies that we are looking to introduce and sort of future changes. So I think I'd really wanted to stress that, and building on those, highly productive relationships that we already have with external stakeholders. So first of all then, on the simplifying customs processes side of things, back in December of last year, we did announce, or the government did announce a series of sort of packages, like next steps, package measures that are really at the heart of them are intending to simplify the processes in respect of customs importing and exporting for traders. Obviously, there is, as always, a trade-off and a balance to be had here around sort of maximum facilitation and sort of simplifying things as much as we can, but also obviously keeping the necessary regulatory and sort of security standards at the border. So looking to kind of find the sweet spot between that balance. And also a lot of this follows, as I was saying before, kind of our real kind of need to put kind of co-design and collaborative work with stakeholders at the heart of this. It follows a number of consultations and calls for evidence that we've had with industry on these proposed improvements. And I'd like to think, that in a positive way, we kind of listen to feedback from stakeholders carefully before deciding on next steps. But also, it's not a once and done approach. Even though we've had sort of formal consultations, we are also planning to continue to work really closely with industry and our forums and stakeholders as we kind of move on to the further design and development of these changes. Lots of detail on this slide. I'm not a fan of detail on slides, but what I've done, the reason why I've done that is because obviously we will share these afterwards so people can sort of read them in more detail at your leisure. But given the time constraints, I won't sort of read them verbatim, you'll be pleased to know. So the first of these measures is around kind of introducing a voluntary standard when it comes to the customs intermediaries and agent sector. A lot of this, as I say, was developed following a consultation. So I think this consultation was back in the summer of last year, June of last year, where the government sort of set out some like high-level principles and proposals for introducing a voluntary standard. And then we sort of listened to that feedback and provided a response document, which I think we published in December. And in terms of what we heard back from industry, I think there was a broad support for raising standards and introducing a voluntary standard in the intermediary sector. I think there's also an acknowledgement that actually there's also a lot of good practice and good stuff that already happens in terms of the agents and intermediaries sphere. So there's a lot of sort of positive feedback that we can build on, but obviously more to be done. And so there was some broad agreement for a standard. I think one of the key takeaways was the importance of, again, sort of collaboration being at the heart of this. And it's obviously an ongoing theme throughout all of these things. A standard designed through that kind of collaboration, something that's credible, that isn't just sort of government upon high sort of dictating what that standard would look like. So very much co-designing it with industry. So it's workable and credible. And so now there's lots of sort of action happening. If any of you were at the HMRC sort of national conference that happened a couple of months back now, I think our policy colleagues in this side of the work sort of did an actual breakout session and an awareness session on these plans, and heard more feedback. We've kind of we are sort of like putting sort of structures in place to again discuss this with trade as this kind of develops. The intention is also to work with the British Standards Institution to make sure like kind of this we're bringing in expertise and advice as this is developed. And also like looking at how this might work with other things at play. So AEO, authorised like operator type areas, and making sure that there's no duplication or kind of complexity about how this would work with things like that. So making sure it also there's synergy and it all hangs together in a very kind of coordinated and straightforward way. So that's kind of like the broad takeaways. There is an industry steering group being put up as well, and I know there will be ongoing dialogue with stakeholders, including the JCCC forum, as this sort of develops. So sort of lots of next steps, but again with stakeholder engagement and co-design at the heart of it. I'll whip through, haven't I? Lots more on the slide for you to enjoy before I go to the next one. So the second one here is around simplifying the customs declarations. So with this particular measure, again, we've consulted on this already. So back in, again, June of 23, there was a consultation entitled The Future of Customs Declarations, where we saw industry sort of views on how declarations and the process can be streamlined and technology potentially kind of tapped into and harnessed to make the declarations easier and more cost effective. And in terms of a lot of sort of like the feedback and takeaways from that consultation was a broad agreement to streamline this by reducing the amount of information that's required on a customs declaration, and making sort of customs data elements kind of optional, some of them, rather than sort of taking them out completely. So obviously having like a core mandatory set of data elements that we do need, but with the other ones not stripping them out completely, having them as sort of optional, and which was an interesting takeaway. But I think it's where sort of software and systems are already built in a particular way, or that trade want that information for other purposes as well. It actually sometimes is more convenient to still supply that information. So obviously, yeah, let's do that. So making some of it a bit more optional. And also trying to obviously explore how we kind of reduce the burden in other ways as well. So I think some of the information on declarations around sort of transport details, identification and location of goods are quite burdensome. So we're looking at seeing whether we can sort of target some of those data fields that are like more burdensome, and see where we can kind of reduce and strip out information required in the future to maximise sort of benefits. And I think there's kind of like a plan to try and reduce those sort of data fields by around about a quarter, so quite significant amounts. So we're obviously on a journey with this one. Again, we'll be working with stakeholders as this sort of develops, but sort of that's the latest in terms of what the plans are. And then we're looking to review, or actually in the middle of a review of temporary admissions, which surprisingly has kind of like increased the use of like temporary admissions from trade since the EU exit. So not surprisingly, really. So there's a lot more people trying to take advantage of sort of those facilitations where you want to bring goods into the country temporarily. And obtaining kind of, relief from the duties. I think it's about in excess of like 10 billion a year worth of goods that come in under temporary admission, so it's not insignificant. There was a call for evidence again last year exploring this, and now there's further work being undertaken around sort of workshops and round tables with kind of key sectors that are interested and do use temporary admissions, but also, again, our key sort of external stakeholders. So I think ACITA were also involved in one of the more recent round tables, and we're looking to kind of explore how we make temporary admissions more facilitative, I guess in three ways really: expanding the eligibility criteria so more traders can take advantage of it, widening the scope of the conditions of use, and also thirdly, basically extending and possibly simplifying the time requirements of how long those types of goods under temporary admissions can stay in the country for longer. Plus just like a general theme of seeing if we can improve kind of guidance available on how to utilise temporary admissions. So lots going on in that space. The policy team are in the midst of exploring those and testing those options, and as I say, working very closely with kind of key interested and impacted stakeholders with a number of roundtables. But again, it's obviously a balance to be had here about making it as facilitative as possible, but also obviously protecting the exchequer and also the domestic market, of course. So conscious of time, you'll be pleased to know the last two, which are obviously the biggest and most important, around transit and modernising authorisations, I won't speak about because we've got some fantastic agenda items coming up in due course. But the final one I did want to mention on the simplifying customs measures was around kind of delaying customs facilitations. Using customs facilitations and delaying the payment of duty without the cost of a financial guarantee. So there's lots of work going on in that area as well. There's plans to introduce that towards the end of this year, probably via modernising authorisations, but there's lots of work going on around how we can finalise that policy and most effectively introduce it, particularly around sort of duty deferment accounts and sort of increasing the instances where guarantees won't be required, and also things like special procedures and temporary storage, targeting where sort of guarantees are required, so a smaller number of users will need to sort of have that cost outlay for the use of for securing a financial guarantee. So lots of simplification activity in that space as well. So moving on then, I did want to just briefly touch on safety and security. The border target operating model, the BTOM, I don't know how many of you will be familiar with that sort of product, which is sort of setting out the government's sort of future ambitions for improving the border. Obviously a lot of it is sort of DEFRA-led, the SBS side of things, but there was also sort of like a key element within the HMRC side on what our plans are for safety and security, and in sort of like how we implement that future regime as effectively as possible, but also very much in mind of being as facilitative and supportive of trade. In terms of what we've done already, we've already introduced the first commitment, which was back in December, where we've introduced a waiver for safety and security on lower risk movements. So things like sort of sea fishing products, outbound transit, and also I think something around sort of like the free ports, goods, and movement outbound on those as well. The next big milestone is in October of this year, 31st October, where we'll be introducing safety and security declaration requirements for movements of goods being imported from the EU. We're attempting to do that in the most sort of effective but simplified way possible, whilst obviously making sure that the regime works effectively. So the plan is to have a reduced data set for safety and security declarations, and I know there's work ongoing now to sort of test those plans. And a bit like what I mentioned previously, there's going to be like a reduced core number of mandatory data fields that will still be required, but actually there'll be some conditional on the sort of goods that you're bringing in the process, but also the rest of them will be optional. But again, if people have sort of systems already in place and software designed that actually makes it more effective to do the same things as you're doing now, then absolutely fine, but they will be optional. So if it does help streamline things for a business, then absolutely we will allow for that. And there will be sort of legislation being introduced, secondary legislation, on all of that in due course as well. So those are the big ticket things in terms of what's upcoming that I wanted to share with you. And given I don't want to deny you your comfort break for too long, I will just mention a final sort of slide on what we're doing to kind of complement the existing sort of standard gov.uk guidance, which is already out there, which is very much sort of, user-centric, task-driven. So I want to do a declaration, how do I do it? And it sort of, click through on each task. We're planning to complement that with a series of technical handbooks, which will be more aimed, I think, at kind of more sort of expert or people kind of more familiar with the customs regime, to set out more about the kind of context. So this is something that we've been asked about for quite a while now. So something beyond that sort of standard gov.uk guidance, which sets out the context, the policy rationale for key elements, the legislation and why the legislation is set out in the way it is. So it's a bit more, well, quite considerably more at a technical level, but certainly something that some of our key stakeholders have been asking for up until now as well. So hopefully that's going to be a good thing. We're working really closely with JCCC, so we have a subgroup, a guidance subgroup, where we are working really closely with those external stakeholders. As we start to produce these, we will sort of test the drafts of these handbooks with them before they are published. And really, this is just a real quick taster of what they might look like. So again, you'll see these slides when they come out, so you can see them and peruse them at your leisure. But essentially, we're hoping that they're fairly straightforward format. You kind of have like rolled up headline sections where you kind of can click, and it provides you sort of more sort of levels of detail for each of the particular topics. So hopefully that's going to be sort of so far it's been kind of positively trailed with some of our stakeholders, but I think that'll be a good thing, and we'll be looking to roll those out in a phased approach, topic by topic, sort of in due course, and hopefully the first one or two will be kind of available quite soon. So I did want to sort of just trail that product as well with you. I think that's my whistle-stop tour.
Anyone have any questions for John? I suppose the only one that I had coming through, John, was, people welcome what's here, and this is a community that sort of deals with that, the compliant community as such. There is sort of, a lot of talk about sort of things about our border being sort of very, very porous, and what I was asked to sort of relay to you that needs to be pushed back, do we have assurance that that porous border is actually being looked at, that you know, HMRC are not taking these sort of path of least resistance, and all these sort of enforcement is coming against us because we're easy to get to?
No, absolutely right. So we are, as I was kind of mentioning, really looking at the sort of the trade-offs and like making sure that whatever we look to introduce, there is an unintended consequence, and having that right balance so that it's facilitative, but absolutely kind of as secure as possible. And, you know, the people who are trying to do things right are like the ones that are rewarded here. But absolutely take your point about, you know, we don't want a porous border, do we? No one wants a porous border. So absolutely right. We do want to sort of make sure that that's borne in mind as we sort of develop these different policy measures.
Thank you. Any questions? Much appreciated. Thanks, John.
Thanks for your time.